We were muted. All right, it is 9 o'clock, and everybody is delighted to spend the day after Veterans Day doing 3 hours of special education, hot topics, and spending time with the KSB attorneys. I will tell you, if things get a little goofy here at the classroom at KSB, the first attorney home from board meetings last night made it at midnight, and the last attorney home from board meetings last night made it at 4 a.m. So we are functioning on adrenaline, caffeine, and a deep and abiding love for special ed law. And so we'll entertain ourselves if nothing else. The materials that Sherry sent out to you guys on Friday are the same as the materials we'll be using today. We did change the order a little bit based on the results of the survey that we sent out on Thursday. And so we'll try to cue you when we're taking something out of order. But if you printed the slides and all of a sudden it seems like we went from slide 17, and then what happened, 18 isn't what's on my papers, we've skipped ahead somewhere. So if you flip forward, you'll find where we are, and then we'll pick up that section. We took those big sections and kind of rearranged them. What else do I want to say here? Oh, if you have questions, one thing that we did add to the deck that you don't have in the printed handouts or the stuff that Sherry emailed out was how to ask us questions. Over the years of trial and error here, we've really landed on the best way for you to get your questions to us is to text them. We do have a chat box open here on the screen, so we will see your chats, but it's kind of a pain, especially if you're at an ESU, to like hustle up to the keyboard and key in a chat on Zoom or whatever. So here are our cell phone numbers. I'm 499-0547. Bobby's 605-670-2968. Steve is 402-499-1869, and Cody is 817-8879. We do have a new player on the team today. You're gonna hear from Jordan Johnson, but I don't have Jordan Johnson's text message up here because he's got enough on his hands, doing his first webinar. Okay, as I say every time I show this slide, lawyers ruin all the fun for everybody, including themselves. We only represent entities, so we represent school districts and service units. We don't represent individuals, so if you're a case manager sitting out there saying, my superintendent told me to make the IEP so it doesn't cost us any money, and I think I have problems from that, we can't represent you in that dispute. So, if you've got, we represent the school, not any individual. So here's how we have organized the materials for today. And again, this organization is different than what was sent out to you. We're going to start with special ed and mental health. We're going to spend about 30 minutes on that. And I'm going to spoil the ending for you. We don't have all the answers for how to solve student mental health issues, but we will talk about the legal issues associated with that. Next, we're going to roll into our suggestions for IEP meetings, who has to be there, and kind of practical suggestions on how to make them efficient, and also to make sure that you have the right documentation at the end. Then we'll talk about the actual drafting of IEPs. And this is Jordan's big section. He's going to talk about behavior intervention plans and include our practical tips on that. Then we'll roll into discipline, and both for students who are identified and have an IEP, and for students who aren't identified but probably should be. We'll hit implementation. The next two sections I'm not sure we'll get to: individual evaluation, educational evaluation requests, and least restrictive environment are both issues that we deal with a lot, but the survey didn't indicate a huge crying need for that. So if we don't get to anything, it'll be those two sections. The chat has nothing to do with anything to stop me, does?
Nope, you're good.
All right, so let's start with mental health and special ed. And I love this cartoon. Try some reverse psychology. You tell me about my mother. I'm waiting for the hysterical laughter to stop. Thank you. So I recently did a session on special education and mental health at the Tri-State Conference, which is a conference hosted by the Departments of Education of Nebraska, Iowa, and Kansas. And just the sheer turnout of people in that room tells me that everybody is struggling with students with mental illness and special education. And so I start out here, I won't go through every one of these statistics, but there is an enormous explosion of students with mental health issues, and they are coming to schools, and more, unsurprisingly, their mental health issues impact their educational performance. One of the big fights that we have here in the office is really, what is a school district's obligation to provide clinical mental health treatment? The case law is clear that if a student needs some sort of medical accommodation, like changing a G-tube or doing a catheter, the school is required to do that. But we are not required to get a kid his flu shot. We're not required to take a student to the doctor and receive treatment for his Crohn's or his cancer. Those are medical treatments that remain the responsibility of the family. And so when you have students coming to school with undiagnosed and untreated mental health issues, the question becomes, where does the line exist between what the school is responsible for and what the family is responsible for? And I say all the time that schools are the only entity where there is a 5-pound bag and we have 8 pounds of crap, and we continuously just put more and more and more in the bag. And what happens is schools are so, I mean this in all sincerity, public schools are so awesome. You eventually say, yes, sir, we'll do that. And we just keep putting more and more and more into that bag. The question is, when are we going to hit the breaking point? And so with providing mental health in schools, having access to a licensed mental health practitioner at schools, I've kind of gotten to the point where I say, you know, we may be money ahead to provide some sort of therapeutic services to students, even though I'm sure that that is not our legal responsibility. And so a school can say, Mom, it's your job to get him to the therapist on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But the problem is, if mom just doesn't get him there, we're left to deal with the fallout of the kid having untreated mental health issues. And as a result of this, and you can see the data nationally, schools are more and more providing at least initial diagnostic assessments to identify students who may have mental health issues. 38% of schools nationwide have actually provided some sort of mental health treatment itself to students. And you see the third bullet point, which is not going to be any surprise to y'all that are listening. The limitations on our ability to provide this kind of treatment is tied to the fact that we don't have funding to fund our legal obligations that exist without this additional mandate, and we don't have parents that understand or support. But superintendents who are out there listening, here's my practical question. If the family says student has a therapist and she goes to therapy twice a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Medicaid is going to pay for the therapy, but mom can't get off work to take the girl, or mom doesn't have a car to take the girl, or mom just doesn't see the need to take the girl, aren't we money ahead to pay a driver to take this girl to and from school and the licensed mental health practitioner? Aren't we money ahead to provide that service even if we're not legally required to, as opposed to you spending the money to call us when she consistently kicks over the table and beats people up, or you to call us when she's truant and we can't get her to school, or you to eventually fund a residential placement because she's so violent we can't help her out at school. And so that's the kind of the balancing act that we have. On the one hand, I don't want to accept more responsibility than we have to, because we've already got enough. But on the other hand, sometimes I think doing things that we aren't legally required to is practically a way to actually conserve district resources in the long run. So this is the list of how students can qualify for services under the IDEA. You know, we have these 13 categories. I always joke that we need to add another one, which would be coded PI, which is parentally impaired. And the ones that are highlighted in red on the screen, they may not be highlighted if you printed the slides, show the areas that are directly linked to verification categories that have implications for mental health. Behavior disordered or emotional disturbance is the most common way we end up verifying students with mental health issues. But the other thing we can do for students with a licensed mental health practitioner who's given us a diagnosis is we can verify that student under other health impairment. So those are our kind of two touchstones for verifications under the IDEA category eligibility. So if we are going to verify a student with a mental health issue under emotional disorder or behavior disorder, these are the criteria that we have to hit. It has to be a condition exhibiting characteristics for a long period of time and to a marked degree that adversely affects the child's educational performance. One of the things I want you to circle is long period of time, because the question becomes, what exactly is a long period of time? And I think if Steve walks into the office every day and screams, F you, I can't take it anymore, probably after 10 days of him doing that. Use a hypothetical. That's true. After 10 or 11 days of him doing that in the second grade classroom, we may feel like that's a long period of time. Legally, I'm not sure that 10 days is a long period of time, but we're balancing across a student's pattern of behavior versus the crisis that we're having in the classroom. So long period of time is more than the fact that the teacher's sick of it and can't take it anymore. And then you see those bullet points that would be the things that have to happen over a long period of time and to a marked degree. Inability to learn that can't be explained by other factors. Here's the next 2 or 3 are the ones where mental health really twings. Inability to build and maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationships with peers and teachers. This is that kid that just doesn't connect with anybody at school. Inappropriate types of behavior or feelings under normal circumstances, or general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression. Now notice this doesn't give us the authority to diagnose depression. You still have to have a mental health certificate to do that. But we can say under ED that it appears that the student has a depressive affect, and that can allow us to verify him even if he doesn't have a diagnosis from a clinician. So that's how you would get a student with mental health issues verified under ED or BD. The way you would do it under OHI is you just need a diagnosis from a medical practitioner that says that the student has some kind of impairment that gives him or her limited strength, limited vitality or alertness. And the next bullet point I think is, or the next thing in that series is what really hits mental health, heightened alertness to environmental stimuli. So like the kid's so worried about what his peers are doing, he's unable to concentrate on what's happening in the classroom. So there are 2 general ways that we see student behavior that triggers our obligation to a child find issue. So first classic case is that the superintendent or the principal calls and says, hey Karen, we want to expel this kid. He has assaulted a teacher and beat up one of his peers. And our first question to the principal is, does the student have an IEP? And if the principal says no, our next question is, should he, right? Even if a student doesn't have an IEP, if he's consistently violent and aggressive, that may trigger the obligation for the school district to say, what is wrong with this kid? Because, I just clicked backwards to the emotional and behavior disorder slide, because if he's consistently beating up his peers, clearly he has an inability to build and maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationships. So we would have an obligation to at least go through the MDT process. That's the kid that's the threat, right? But there's the other classic mental health child find swing and a miss, and that's when the principal calls us and says, hey Karen, we don't know what to do about this kid. She won't come to school. When she's here, she's really smart, she does great, but she just won't come to school. And that can also trigger your child find obligation, because her inability to get to school could indicate that she has limited strength, vitality, or alertness because she has some sort of depressive mental illness. So it's both the like hoodie wearers and the teacher punchers. Both of those could trigger our obligation under child find. So let's look at a couple of cases that deal with schools that have had to identify a student with mental health. This first one is more of the hoodie wearer. This is a girl from Minnesota, case from 2019. Starting in 8th grade, she just misses a crap ton of school. In the first semester of 8th grade, she misses 18 days. And in March of that school year, she just stops attending altogether. Eventually, mom and dad call the school, and they say, we're so sorry that Sally is not in school. She's in the hospital, and she's been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder and depression. So the school district says, oh, we're so sorry, but we are not going to give her an IEP or a 504 plan. In fact, we're not even going to refer her for formal evaluation because she's super smart. Her grades are really, really good. The school did excuse the absences while the student was hospitalized, but they did not use that hospitalization to do anything other than to do they call it SIT in Minnesota. We call it SAT here in Nebraska. So they sat at her and excused the absences, but that's all they did. All right, so we roll into 9th grade. Her attendance does not get any better. She's actually re-hospitalized twice. And this school district has one of those policies that after you miss X number of days, we're gonna automatically disenroll you. We have some districts in Nebraska that have this sort of approach as well, especially if you've got a real itinerant population, like you go home to visit the family in Mexico for Thanksgiving and don't come back for 6 weeks. Schools are quick to disenroll those kind of students just so that our AQUEST scores and other stuff is accurate. We're not having a bunch of kids on the rolls that really aren't attending. So in this school, they disenroll her because she's just missed so much school. In the summer, the family is getting ready to enroll this girl in 10th grade classes, and they say to the guidance counselor something like, she's like missed a lot of school and is having all these mental health issues. Is there some sort of like accommodation or plan we can give her? And the guidance counselor says, you know, we could give her a 504 plan or look at her for special education, but I'm not sure you want to do that because if she has an IEP, she can't be in AP honors courses. Quick footnote, that is absolutely not true, right? Students with IEPs absolutely are entitled to participate in challenging curricula if that student's academics support that. But this guidance counselor in this school has that kind of old school idea that if a kid is smart, she can't have an IEP, and if the kid has an IEP, she can't be smart. So the counselor says, well, she couldn't take honors courses, and so the family's like, well, we want to keep her in AP because, you know, she excels. So she rolls into 10th grade. 10th grade, the school creates a 504 plan. They don't do any additional evaluations or meetings, but they just come up with this 504 plan, kind of pulling it out of their ear. But they don't include in that 504 plan any kind of excuse if she has a lot of absences. Misses more than 15 days each semester, they disenroll her under this policy. Rolling into 11th grade, the family finally says, we want a formal multidisciplinary team evaluation. We think she needs an IEP. In 11th grade, the school district says, she's so academically capable, we are not going to give her an IEP, but we are going to put her in an alternative program. The alternative program has a setup where like the kid goes to school for half a day and then works for half a day. It's like a lot of the alternative schools we have here in the state. Girl goes 2 days, never comes back. Family sues, alleging that the school district should have evaluated this girl. Now, full stop right here. If this is a student that you are like recognizing some of these categories, this is your cue to think to yourself, when do we have noticed that it's time to sack her? And when do we have noticed that it's time to move her on to the 504 or IEP process? And we should not be waiting for the family to file due process, right? There's multiple steps along the way where the school could have said, hey, it's probably time for a verification or at least an evaluation. But the school doesn't do anything till the family sues. The administrative law judge finds for the family. School district appeals, arguing that the school has not violated the IDEA because the girl's doing swimmingly academically. She scored like, I can't remember, 31, 32 on the ACT. And the school's like, how are we not giving her a free and appropriate public education when she's just crushing things academically? And the court on appeal in district court in Minnesota said that although the student's absenteeism was a barrier to the school district observing her and gathering data about what was wrong with her, her absenteeism was also one of the most visible symptoms of her disability. Put a check mark here so that when you call us with that kid that you just can't get to school, ask yourself, is that the most visible symptom of that child's potential disability? Next, the court says, if nobody disputes that the girl really did well on standardized tests, she crushed the ACT, but no one can dispute also that not being in school inhibited her progress in the curriculum. So this is the kid that misses a ton of school, not a problem when she's in school, can trigger your child find obligation. Now, compare and contrast that to this, what the school did in this case. This is another kid who's hospitalized for depression, right? Another kid that is academically very capable, doing fine in school. When he's hospitalized in 2011, it's not just that he's depressed, he's also thinking about, he also has homicidal ideations. The next bullet point shows you this case is really a transition case. The family's really mad that the kid got graduated, but that's not what the fight was about legally. The fight was about whether or not the school should have done something in response to this kid being hospitalized. So just like in Minnesota, parents call the school, say the kid's hospitalized. Just like in Minnesota, the school district convenes their student assistance team. Just like in Minnesota, they decide not to give the kid an IEP, even though he's been hospitalized for depression. But the student assistance team says the kid is well liked, he has a high ability but inconsistent effort, and they say at this point in time the kid does not qualify. Now they did agree to excuse his absences, and they did agree to reduce his course load to kind of reduce his anxiety. The SAT team also said, hey, if you have any other medical diagnoses, like if he has ADHD, let us know. January, a month later, the student is diagnosed with ADHD. Family brings that diagnosis back to the school. And the school says, well, okay, now that we've got the hospitalization, some of the problems of inconsistent effort, and this diagnosis, we think he qualifies for Section 504, but he does not have an IEP. So the school does a 504 plan. 3 months later, the kid is so anxious that he won't come to school at all. The school once again evaluates the student for potential IDEA services, finds him ineligible because they say, look, he's been struggling with this since December. That's basically 3 or 4 months. That is not a long period of time. But since the kid is refusing to come to school, they do homebound him under the 504 plan. So basically he's accessing school via OdysseyWare or Infinite or Plato, whatever your online curriculum is. That's how he finishes out the school year. In June of 2014, so 3 months later, the kid is again expressing suicidal and homicidal ideation. He is again evaluated by the school district. Now the school district says this has been a long period of time and this is to a marked degree. He gets an IEP. Family says school district has violated the child find obligation because they should have identified him back in December. Now this case, unlike the Minnesota case, school district wins. The Second Circuit says the district's actions were both reasonable and accommodating. It's not the fact that they didn't identify him right away. They held these meetings, they considered all the data, they put their reliance over on the idea of whether or not it was a long period of time. But it wasn't just that the district was denying services and saying you're too smart to have an IEP. The district was placing its reliance on the fact that he hadn't met the statutory criteria. 2 different cases. Now, the Minnesota case went on for years. This case went on for months. I think that's one difference. But the other really big difference between these 2 cases that I want you to see is repeatedly having those meetings, repeatedly gathering that data. That is your best defense to a child find violation.
Got
Yes.
a question.
Yes.
Student is diagnosed with narcolepsy, is consistently late to school, always gets work done, has a 34 on the ACT. Possible eligibility, including under section 504.
Funny story, when I was in graduate school, I had a professor with narcolepsy who would fall asleep in class. And what we were instructed to do was just to quietly leave, which was hilarious to me. So, so yes, I think narcolepsy, at a minimum, I would convene a 504 committee because I think that's a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits the child in a major life activity. The question is, OHI, does he meet those criteria under OHI for an actual IEP? And then what's the accommodation going to be? I'm assuming the accommodation is going to be that you're going to allow him to come late to school and have full credit as a day attended. You're probably going to, I mean, if his narcolepsy presents as sleeping in, man, I've got narcolepsy. Kidding. No, if his narcolepsy presents as sleeping in, you could have a late start for him as an accommodation. Back end the academic load instead of having it early in the school day. But yeah, 100%, I would convene an IEP or a 504 committee and probably an MDT to see if this kid meets the criteria for OHI. Thank you for the question. I'm not checking the text, so you check yours. Okay, I think this is the last case in my little section. So we've talked about 2 examples of the kid that's not really problematic at school, but whose absences and depression kind of indicated a need to be evaluated. This is the kid that you're calling me about because you want him out of the building because he's such a gigantic pain in your butt. This is a kindergartner who has a rough home life. He's been living with a mom who's addicted to meth, and then he gets moved on to grandma. And once grandma has him, she starts asking the school to do an IDEA evaluation because she says something is not right with this kid. School says, you know what, he's still transitioning into kindergarten. He also has these enormous transitions in his home life because he's moved from chaos to grandma. And one of the factors that you're supposed to consider is whether there are other things that rule out a child's eligibility for special education services. So the school says, you know, we're not going to do anything now. The rule out factors indicate that he could probably transition into kindergarten just fine eventually. Look at the last bullet point on this slide. This is what they did wrong. They never convened to readdress the student or to refer him after he starts exhibiting these additional behaviors. This kid is a nightmare in the kindergarten class. He hits his peers. He's a kindergartner masturbating in class. That is not typical. On a single day, he hit a classmate with a rock, threw a toy, ran away from school, masturbated in class. You can imagine that the kindergarten teacher is like, oh my gosh, we need help. The team eventually reconvenes in April of 2015. So we've gone to almost the whole school year with this behavior in kindergarten. And they say he does not meet the criteria for special ed. Excuse me? And the school says, well, that's because even though he's masturbating and cursing and hitting, you know, academically he's doing great. His math scores are right on track. And so again, this is a school that seems to have that confused idea that just because a kid is smart doesn't mean he can have an IEP. So they don't give him an IEP. He rolls into first grade, punches other students, throwing chairs. And this cracks me up. This last bullet point is what ultimately triggers the school to reconvene the multidisciplinary team. Steals his teacher's lunch and eats it. You know, it's okay for him to masturbate all the time, but once you steal my lunch, that's not okay. So the school does not find the student eligible for special ed. Again, the school is saying he's smart, so he doesn't qualify. Grandma files a due process complaint alleging that the student should have been given an IEP. Hearing officer says school district failed to meet its child find obligations because they did not convene the team and find that his behavior indicated a need for special education. And we get a call about this kid all the time. We don't know what's wrong with him. We don't have a diagnosis. But if the student is exhibiting these kinds of wildly atypical behaviors in the classroom, at a minimum, we should be asking questions about whether we need to have additional data on his behavior. And then notice too that we do not have to have a medical diagnosis in order to verify this kid ED or BD, right? We just have to have data that says he is not developing appropriate relationships to a marked degree for a long period of time. I think if you're masturbating and hitting your first grade peers, that's probably interfering with your ability to form appropriate relationships. So that's a whirlwind tour into student mental health issues. I have questions. One thing I would really emphasize to all of you as we start talking about how to interact with legislators, I think we have not done a fabulous job of communicating to state senators just how significant the mental health issues are that we're dealing with in our schools. I think senators are thinking these are like a few sad kids, and consistently and repeatedly communicating to policymakers about just how significant the mental health crisis is that we're facing. I just don't know any other way to get the funding and the political support for the needs that we have for the kids that are clearly struggling with these mental health issues. Okay, got some questions. Question here, what if staff members think it's their job to get kids off an IEP? The reason I'm hemming and hawing is it's an interesting question, and I don't want to identify who it's from because it's about a specific staff member. So our goal is always for students to receive a free and appropriate public education and to achieve on grade level. But a student with mental health issues or with behavior issues that stays on an IEP and has that IEP supporting him or her throughout their academic career, that's not a failure of special ed. To me, that is showing the purpose of special education. So if you've got a staff member who really thinks it's their job to find a way to throw kids out, number one, we need to have a candid conversation with that staff member about what their statutory obligations are. And then number two, I would really challenge that staff member to think about this. This kid in St. Louis, the kid that is violent or disruptive, when the kid is not special ed, we only have a couple or three options for dealing with that kid legally. We can put that kid in the neighborhood school and let him disrupt his peers, or we can suspend or expel him. If we suspend or expel this kid, he's a boomerang, right? We throw him out and 19 days later or one semester later, he comes back and he's still our problem. If the kid is special ed, we have a whole continuum of things we can do with the kid. So lots of times staff members who think that what they want to do is get the kid off an IEP who's got mental health, they think that that's because we can discipline kids without an IEP and we can't discipline kids with IEPs. And I think that's actually twisted and they have it backwards. So try discussing that with this staff member who thinks it's their job to get the kid off the IEP, that actually keeping the kid on the IEP gives us more options for dealing with these kinds of maladaptive behaviors. Let's see. That's all I have for questions. Anybody else have questions? Text them now. Okay, Mr. Williams is up next.